Hello everyone and welcome to another Total Education Centre lecture. Today I'm going to be lecturing on the introduction to the topic area Discovery, our area of study for 2015 to 18. What I want to do is start talking to you about the area of study in the context of what the Board of Studies wants. If you haven't read the Board of Studies notes and the rubric for it, the very first thing you should do is go to page 9 of the HSC prescriptions 2015 to 2020. On that document you'll find area of study 2015 to 18, and you need to read that very carefully. The most important thing there is that it tells you exactly what you are studying. It doesn't matter what text your teacher chooses, and there are 15 texts to choose from. My class, for example, this year would be doing Robert Frost poetry, and we'll be looking at that in terms of discovery. People have got choice between fiction, drama, poetry and media. So there are a whole range of things that you'll be looking at, but what the board's notes do is guide you specifically into what you should be looking for, what you can do, and what you're going to be examined on more importantly. And I'd like to just read you a little bit about that before we move on to talking about discovery. Remember, in that first paper, paper 1, that's going to be about discovery. So your short answer questions will be about discovery. Your creative writing will be about discovery. And your textual essay, of course, at the end will be about discovery. So for you, that whole paper for the next 12 months or so is about discovery, and you'll be probably sick of discovery by the time you get to the end of it, but you will have a very thorough knowledge of what you need to do. So you're required by the board to really explore discovery and the things you know about discovery. You're also required to explore it in texts that aren't given to you by your teacher, or they might be given to you by your teacher, but you need to find other texts outside the prescribed list, or at least a text to write on at minimum, that you'd be required to look at. I always prefer to do far more than 2 or 3. They can ask you to write on more than one. It's best to have several prepared. It's easy to do over those 12 months, and you'll do assessment tasks on it and other activities that I'm sure you'll do. In the end, you may want to go off and find your own, and I would recommend that, so you're not writing about the same thing as everybody else in your class. In the area of study, you're asked to look at those links between the texts, and of course, in this case, the link is discovery. So initially, you'll study your set text, whatever it may be, and then you'll go off and look at other texts that fit that model. Now, discovery comes in many shapes and forms, that I'll talk about that, but I really want to just have a look at what the board wants you to do first. There's too much to read all of this. It is quite a long page in the prescriptions document, but it says at the end of it, after there's 3 or 4 paragraphs of information that the board gives you and talks to you about discoveries and what they are and what they do and how you can look at them. But I want to just look at the last few points, and I'll read this directly from the document, and thanks to the Board of Studies for putting out something like this, and I'm going to quote them exactly. In their responses and compositions, students examine, question and reflect and speculate on their own experiences of discovery, the experience of discovery in and through their engagement with texts, assumptions underlying various representations of the concept of discovery, how the concept of discovery is conveyed through the representations of people, relationships, societies, places, events and ideas that they encounter in the prescribed text and other related texts of their own choosing. They also need to look at how the composer's choice of language, modes, forms, features and structure shapes representations of discovery and discovering. And finally, the ways in which exploring the concept of discovery may broaden and deepen their understanding of themselves and their world. Now I'd advise you to go back and look at all those things and read them very carefully, because that's what you're being asked to do, and each specific text will ask you to do that in different ways. Now the very first thing I would do, and I would recommend to you after you read this document, is to go and have a look very carefully at definitions of discovery. And what I'd like you to do is get a definition of discovery that matches what you're doing. if you just regurgitate dictionary definitions and definitions that don't exactly fit, they're not going to help you with your essay and marry that next thing. Your definition of discovery should cover the things that you need to talk about in your essay and the things that are in your text. And you need to have that definition in your own words. And I can't recommend that highly enough, because working out that definition in the first place, or some sort of like nearly introductory paragraph, will help you analyse down what you're really looking for and what's really in the text and how you're going to understand that. So I think it's really important to get that working definition, get lots of different definitions, and always remember that discoveries aren't always positive. Don't forget that some discoveries and some texts that you'll study being discovered, for example, can have a very negative effect on Indigenous peoples. Discovering explosives wasn't a very positive thing for some people. There's always some sort of negative, and perhaps that might assist you in looking at a different angle in your text to what's going on from everybody else, and make your essay a little bit different to everybody else's. So I would encourage that. Now, there are many types of discovery that you can look for, and not all of them will be in your text. What you need to do is work out what types of discovery are in your text and work on them in great detail. The common mistake everybody makes doing that final section, and I'll talk about the other two sections in a different video, but the essay, is that they try and retell the story of their text and retell all the parts that have a discovery or a bit of discovery in them. And that's a big mistake, because they forget that final point, which is about techniques and language and how you discover through those things what's in the text. So what types of discovery are there that you might look for? There's of course those personal discoveries, the things that might change you and make you something very different. You know, and partly that leads on to, I suppose, discussing the ideas about inner discovery and the changes that we can make, and how people discover themselves and learn about themselves and meditate and all those sorts of things. I mean, those things can be important for very specific texts, and you need to look for those and see how people adapt and change. It's also an interesting point to see how an individual, what they're like before they discover and what they're like after they have made that discovery, and whether they change or not, and whether they change for the better or for the worse. Discovery doesn't have to make you a better person. Discovery can possibly make you a worse person and make you very different to the person you were before. Discovery, when we talk about discovery, we usually think about the early explorers and travel and all those sorts of things, and that's a little bit, you know, in a text like RAC, that's very, very important, but it might not be so important in others. We might travel in different ways. Scientific and technological change and discoveries are very important, and you can talk about the big changes in those. Like, I mean, you talk about things like the discovery of the wheel and how it changed the world, discovery of the engine and how it changed the world, all those sorts of discoveries, big impact discoveries. And there are little impact discoveries too that you might find in text and in your other textual material that change the way other people think. Cures for very specific diseases are very important and great discoveries for a very limited number of people. And they mightn't have world impact, but they certainly have a big impact in that way. What else? We can talk about discovery creating new from old, the concept of recycling, repackaging, re-engineering, re-imaging, all those sorts of things that the modern world does. We can talk about discovery and the learning and how we learn to discover, and discovery through learning, and all those sorts of things. There are, you know, the obvious ones. A lot of discovery comes through detection, and it's not just, it can be scientific detection, it can be crime detection and all those sorts of things, and that's quite available and visible in these texts that you're going to study. You can talk about psychological discovery, you can talk about the discovery of how all the isms have changed the world, those philosophical discoveries that have had huge impact on the human way of life, and you'll see those integrated into the text in a significant way in many things. As I've said, negative aspects of discovery are also very important. So that's how we basically begin our look at discovery. We go back, we look at the rubric very carefully, we work out our own definition, we work out what types of discovery in our text, and then later on we bring them all together. So that's basically an overview of the area of study discovery. That's one way that you as a student can get started into it, and we will look at more specific text later on. My name is Bruce Pattinson. I'm here from the Total Education Centre. I hope this text has been valuable, this lecture has been valuable to you. You might like to give us a like down below. Don't forget to visit our website. And if you have any questions or issues or want to make a comment, please do so. We'll get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you for watching this video. Bye-bye.